A crimson dusk lay heavy across the canyon, the wind whistling low through stone hollows, carrying with it the smell of dust and sage. A lone rider pressed on, shoulders bent, as if beneath an invisible weight. His name was Caleb Thorne, a cowboy whose boots had crossed too many miles and whose heart had carried too many ghosts. His horse plodded slow, every hoofbeat swallowed by the emptiness of the desert. To watch him was to see a man unraveling quietly, a shadow swallowed by a larger shadow. The land itself seemed to breathe with sorrow, as though it remembered each soul who had fallen upon it. And then, just beyond a wall of red rock where the twilight thickened, Caleb's eyes caught a sight that stilled his breath. Two girls, barefoot, bound by fraying ropes, pressed against stone like wildflowers bent by wind. Their faces were streaked with tears, their cheeks hollowed by hunger, and their dark hair tangled with dust. They did not cry out when he approached. They only stared, wide-eyed, like deer cornered by a hunter. His hand went to the knife at his belt. He crouched low, voice gentler than he'd spoken in years. "Easy now. I'll cut you free." The rope fell, one frayed strand at a time, until their small wrists were raw but unbound. Yet when his fingers brushed their skin, they flinched back as though his touch might burn. Their mistrust struck him sharper than any blade, reminding him of the times he too had been shunned. Eyes turned from him, as if his presence brought misfortune. Their silence branded him as both savior and stranger, and in their suspicion he recognized his own reflection, an exile, even in kindness. The ride back to his cabin was hushed, but taut with fear. The older girl, Naya, held her sister close, every muscle rigid, her gaze never leaving him. Sona, the smaller one, buried her face in her sister's shoulder, whimpering only when the horse lurched over uneven ground. Caleb said little, only guiding them through the dusky brush until the humble outline of his cabin appeared near the whispering creek. Inside, he lit a fire with practiced hands, set out bread hardened by days of solitude, and offered them water. They ate in silence, the crackle of firewood filling the air. He did not press them with questions, nor with comfort too sharp to bear. Instead, his kindness revealed itself in small gestures. The blanket folded with care, the log tossed quietly into the hearth, the cup refilled without a word. These were the only ways he knew how to bridge the chasm between loneliness and trust. But even here, the world pressed its weight upon him. In the back of his mind, he heard the mutterings of the townfolk, voices that had long shaped his silence. "That drifter Thorne," they'd say, "carries nothing but bad luck. Best keep her distance." He had borne those words like stones in his pocket, each one pulling him lower, and now, seeing the girls shrink back from him, he feared they too would believe the whispers before they ever knew the man. Morning brought light, and with it, the risk of eyes. Caleb led the girls to the general store in town, needing supplies to keep them fed. The moment he stepped through the door with the Apache children at his side, the air shifted. Men paused midward. Women exchanged looks sharp as needles. "What's he doing with them?" someone murmured, not low enough. Caleb did not respond, only kept his shoulders squared, shielding the girls as though his silence were a wall against the judgment pressing in. The girls noticed. They saw him absorb the sting of shame without faltering, and though they said nothing, a quiet recognition settled between them. That night, back at the cabin, the silence was not so heavy. Naya, strong beyond her years, whispered a single word, "Thanks." The sound was thin, almost shy, but it cut through Caleb's armor like morning light through fog. Later, Sona approached, her small hand curled around a pebble she had found by the creek. She pressed it into his palm, a child's offering. Caleb stared at it, as though it were gold, for in its simplicity it held more trust than he had known in years. By the fire, he watched them drift into sleep, their breathing soft, their faces smoothed of fear. He sat long into the night, feeling the first stirrings of companionship settle in his chest like a seed after drought. Each look, each small gesture carried more weight than 100 spoken vows. He realized then that trust was not given in declarations. It bloomed in the quiet, fragile acts no one else would notice. The following days drew them closer still. He caught Naya laughing once, chasing Sona down by the creek, their bare feet splashing in the water. The sound startled him, like a bird taking flight where silence had long been. That laughter unearthed memories he had buried deep. The sound of his sister's joy before fever carried her away. The echo of dreams he thought had dried up with the years. Watching the girls, he felt the brittle shell around his heart crack. For the first time in years, Caleb Thorne felt the stir of redemption. He knew saving them was more than an act of mercy. It was a mirror held against his own soul. These girls were not simply survivors. They were a chance for him to remember what it meant to care, to guard, to be human again. But as the sun slipped behind the canyon one evening and shadows lengthened, he felt a truth rise in his chest like a warning. This story was not yet finished. Somewhere, someone would come for them. And when that moment arrived, he would be forced to decide. Was he ready to let go? Or would his lonely heart refuse the parting? The dawn came soft and golden, stretching light across the canyon like a ribbon of fire. Caleb sat on the porch with a cup of bitter coffee cooling in his hands, the two girls still sleeping inside, their breath steady and safe. But the silence was broken, not by wind, not by bird call. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate. A rider approaching. Out from the trail emerged a woman on a chestnut horse, her presence carrying the weight of both command and sorrow. She was tall, with dark braids tied in red beads, her eyes sharp as the edge of flint. The girls stirred inside, then bolted out the cabin door. "Mother!" Naya cried, her voice breaking into 1,000 shards of relief. Sona clung to her waist, sobbing into the folds of her doeskin dress. Caleb stood frozen. Relief washed through him, but so did an unexpected hollowness. He had known from the first moment that this day would come, yet facing it left him unmoored. He watched the woman dismount, wrapping her arms fiercely around her daughters, pressing her face to their hair as though she would breathe them back into her soul. Her name was Ayoka. When her eyes finally lifted, they settled on Caleb. There was no suspicion, no anger, only a long, unreadable gaze. Then she stepped forward, pulling something from her saddlebag, a bundle wrapped in cloth. She laid it before him on the porch, a bundle of desert herbs, a carved talisman in the shape of a hawk, and words that fell heavier than any coin. "Come to our fire tonight. You will eat with us. You will not sit alone again." It startled him more than if she had drawn a blade. He had expected dismissal, perhaps even scorn. Instead, her offering was strange, deeper than payment. It was an invitation, a recognition of the quiet mercy he had given when no one else would. Caleb's throat tightened, but he only nodded, unable to speak against the tide of feeling pressing in his chest. The news spread faster than wildfire. By noon the town buzzed with whispers. "Thorne's taking meals with the Apache now," a storekeeper sneered. Men spat tobacco into the dust. Women muttered behind gloved hands. The town had always kept Caleb at its edges. Now, they shoved him further. He carried their judgment like a cloak of thorns. Yet the sting had dulled. For somewhere beyond their fences, a fire waited where he was not unwelcome. That evening, he rode out to the Apache camp. The fire glowed against the dusk, children's laughter ringing clear as bells. Caleb sat among them awkwardly at first, listening to stories spoken in a tongue not his own, the rhythm like a river he could almost understand. The girls nestled close, unburdened now, their laughter spilling like water across stones. Ayoka offered him food in silence, their hands brushing as the bowl passed between them. She did not thank him with words, but her gaze held gratitude deeper than any language could carry. Night after night, he returned, not as savior, not as stranger, simply as man among people who did not measure him by rumor or by past. The bond between him and Ayoka did not burn fast like wildfire. It grew instead like roots, steady, quiet, in the soft places between gestures. A glance held a heartbeat too long, a silence shared beside firelight, a trust forming not from grand declarations, but from the ease of simply being. But the world beyond their circle did not rest easy. One night, as the creek whispered low and the girls slept within, 3 men came to Caleb's cabin. Their boots thudded heavy against the boards, their words sharp as knives. "You're crossing lines, Thorne. Those ain't your people. Best leave 'em be." The warning was thick with venom, heavy with promise of violence. Caleb stood in the doorway, lantern light carving lines into his weary face. For years, he had shrunk from judgment. But this time, his voice was steady. "They're human same as you. Leave them." The men left, but their threat lingered like storm clouds. Caleb knew they would return, and they did. At dusk, when the desert sky bled red and shadows stretched long, they rode into the Apache camp, guns slung, mouths curled in hate. Women gathered the children close, fear sharp in the air. Caleb stepped forward, rifle in hand, his heart pounding not for blood, but for resolve. He did not stand as a drifter or an exile anymore. He stood as a shield. The men sneered. "Move aside, Thorn." But Caleb did not move. Behind him, Ayoka stepped forward, unarmed, her presence aflame in the dark. She stood shoulder to shoulder with him, her gaze cutting through the danger. The girls clung to her skirts, their trust burning brighter than fear. For a long breath, time held still. The men faced not a lone drifter, not a woman and 2 children, but a wall of quiet dignity, a defiance too solid to break. Their hands faltered on their guns. One spat into the dust, muttered a curse, and turned his horse. The others followed, their retreat swallowed by the desert's vast silence. The camp erupted not in cheers, but in the soft release of breath, the sound of children crying into their mother's arms, the crackle of fire continuing as if nothing had threatened to snuff it out. Victory had come without bullets, won instead by the courage to stand together. That night, Caleb sat by the fire, the girls curled against his side, their laughter returning like birds after storm. Ayoka looked at him through the glow, her voice low, carrying more weight than the desert wind. A man is not measured by where he comes from, but by who he stands beside. Caleb felt something in him settle, a loneliness years deep eased at last. He had wandered too long through shadows, branded by whispers and silence. Yet here, in the warmth of a fire not his own, he found himself no longer drifting. He had found belonging, not in land or title, but in the grace of standing beside the unwanted. And if you listen closely, dear soul, you may hear what Caleb learned written upon the wind. Sometimes the world will call you an outcast, curse your name, leave you to sit alone. But if you choose mercy over bitterness, if you shield the small and walk with those cast aside, you will find a home. Not always where you expect, but always where the fire is warm and the laughter returns.